one of the stages of writing that I enjoy most is when I have an idea that I can just barely touch with a fingertip and I can't fully grasp. And you feel as if you're working absolutely at limits of your comprehension. And so to help me get there, I've invited my friend Olesh to join the conversation. And I haven't told him what it's about. And as a result, this is going to be an advertisement for the swiftness of his comprehension and the rapidity of his thought, especially as we're working in what is probably his third language. So this is where I'd like to start. Oh, and because I can't pay Olesh, but instead I'm going to give him a different kind of reward, which is that I am going to invite him to interrupt whenever he wants to.
I'll do it then anyway, so you know.
Exactly. So it's a free reward right there. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to start out with an observation which includes French and is about the nature of meaning. So in English, we have this phrase, I mean, you know, what does he mean? What does that mean? But in French, you say, qu'est-ce que cela veut dire? What does it want to say? First of all, what do you say in Polish? What's the Polish equivalent?
You can use both of those, but they have a slightly different meanings, though. The one that we use in semiotics would be znaczy, which means to mean, to signifier, actually, signify. And because znak, the basic word, which is derives meaning, it's a sign in Polish, znak. But then you can say, co nam to mówi? So what does it say to us? But this is a different form of meaning. Znak is the most scientific kind of meaning. When you're saying what does it say to us, it's like what kind of knowledge you derive from it for yourself. Sometimes the teachers would say, oh, look at this situation. And what does it say to us?
Okay.
So that's what else we can use for meaning.
All right. So starting from there, and because I'm still working on my book, Writing Beyond Writing, what really interests me about this distinction between what it is we mean, or perhaps what we want to convey, and what we want to say, because the latter implies that the way to convey meaning is to put it into words, right? And in fact, the conventional contemporary definition of writing is that it is a way of representing speech visually or graphically.
But you've gone away with that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in just a sec. We'll come back to that.
Pretty well, so.
Right. So the assumption seems to be that the best way to convey what we want to say about what we're thinking, what we're feeling, etc., is by putting it into words. And yet we are well aware of many situations when we can't put into words what we are thinking or feeling. In fact, it wouldn't be stretching a point too much, I don't think, to say that the more deeply we are feeling something, or, and this is a great meta-analogy for this conversation, the more profound the thought that we're trying to grasp, the harder it is to put into words. And so what I'm trying to do in this conversation, and I'm hoping that you'll help me with this, is to tie together the fact that linguists have typically, especially in the 20th century, associated writing with something that is tethered to speech. And yet, we know that there are things that are very, very important that we can't put into words. And in fact, one of the fascinating things about writing, once you get beyond our standard Latin usage of writing, is that there are many scripts or many forms of non-phonetic writing that help us to convey stuff without putting it specifically into words. And you and I have talked a lot about forms of communication that are graphic, that may involve the use of a pen or a pencil or a printing device or something else, but nevertheless are not intended to be reproduced identically in the same words every time they're used. And you had a whole bunch of examples of these, and maybe you can talk about a few of those right now.
Well, as you probably know, you're talking about the 20th century linguistics. I'm pretty sure the 21st century linguistics are pretty different. That's the only point I wanted to make while talking about your book. It's the theoretical part where when we talk about what linguists think, because we are still referring to like really old school things. Because now there is more or less growing consensus about, it's still not reaching the popular linguistics. The growing consensus that writing represents something else than just purely speech. And actually, I want to show you something that we've been working on recently, because there is the phenomenon of the Night of the Museums, right?
No.
No, the Night of the Museums is something that is happening all over the continent of Europe. You know, that little funny continent, as Mao Zedong said, with no meaning. But we have this beautiful night every year when we let people visit any kind of museum or an educational facility for free, almost for an entire night. Sometimes it takes overnight, sometimes it's until 1 o'clock. And Oriental Studies is going to make a game within our Oriental Studies department, which will also have something like this. I'm not going to give you the actual project because they will kill me because it's still secret, but I'll show some basic things that are part of that project. At least part of it, because as I see, my camera setup is not wide enough. As you probably can recognize, I'm writing some symbols, but here is going to be weird. It's probably difficult to recognize the way I drew it. Well, maybe I'll do it once again. We'll change the angle, it will be better. Oh yeah, that will be much better. So it's interesting when you see all the references that are within this project. You probably can see some of it.
Okay, so that looks like a yin and yang symbol.
Yin and yang symbol, yeah. The other one is a bit different.
It looks like a hand? No?
Yeah, that's Hamsa. It's a five-fingered hand with his Hamsa. It's a good luck symbol in most of the African and Arabic-derived cultures.
Okay.
Also recognized in Israel and some other places. And and there's 4 other symbols. One of them is a dinka. It's especially for you. I told them just to include some African symbol. It best to be a dinka, and I think though in the final design they will include one. I believe they have chosen Which one they have chosen? Something like that, or something similar.
Okay.
Yeah. And what do you see? This is the typical way of symbolic representation, which is not a painting, because in paintings you have persons, and in academic painting in 19th century you see it especially well developed when you have a lot of symbols hidden within writing, hidden within a painting. But here you have definitely symbols, and most of them are writing derived in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because this one actually refers to Uziemblo and
Okay.
the Mongolian fire symbol. Then the shape of it refers to Chinese talismanic writing that is bringing happiness. And all those are reversing to the original cultures. Ah, yeah, and the fourth one is Ankh, Egyptian Ankh.
Yep.
So two cultures, but they all of them, in a way, exist in a visual culture. They have a particular meaning, but it will be unpronounceable to anybody.
Right.
You can explain it by a very lengthy process of explaining, but it is not proper language, is it? And of course, we can quarrel about symbolics and so on. And I think that entire visual culture, in a way, it's always balancing between the completely phonetic writing system that is especially designed to represent speech, and it is also important, and entirely symbolic writing system, which is designed to represent ideas and the connection between ideas. And like, think of tables. You remember Mikulska's article about tables and connecting meanings on a flat surface, two-dimensional, or even on three-dimensional space. You can have different meanings connected by superposition or positioning of the meaningful parts. And those are different and very different from linear speech, because what is speech? Speech is linear. That's why when we think of writing and we have it printed in our mind that it must be representation of speech, the second thing we do is linear. Linearity is something we always connect with writing. But if you look at the page of the newspaper, then you see it is by no means linear. You construct meanings by positioning all those things in space in different ways, even on the page of the newspaper. When you have different things of meanings. The best example for me is the way the catechismos sculptures work. In certain cultures in South America, you've got sculptures and objects placed that symbolize different parts of Catholic catechism. And they function as a memory aid. We don't like this word, but okay, as a memory aid, or as a representation of certain set of meanings that it would be difficult to represent by writing. What is interesting, have you ever heard of memetics?
Yeah.
The scientific meaning or the internet culture meaning, because they're two different.
Okay, tell me.
The scientific meaning, the one that was derived from Susan Blackmore and this atheist guy, Dawkins. They had an idea that what is the gene for the genetics? That's the mean to human culture. Mean is a kind of a device that helps to spread certain kind of behaviors or sets of behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the beautiful pictures that we send over the internet, but the original mean is the kind of reproducing behavior bearing kind of information.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what I'm talking here is actually something that may actually be the meme. The memes, as we know them on the internet, sometimes do that too. They actually enable us to share and spread some kind of behavior, some kind of even joke is a kind of behavior.
Right.
But what I was talking about, the encoding of catechismos with the sculpture, that's even not a meme, that's memplex, what is called in this theory. So the whole set of behaviors, this famous phrase, virus of the mind. This is the one that is talking about the more scientific, although of course scientists do not agree there is anything like memes, but I think it is still in the workings. Some people are still working on the theory of memetics.
So, in other words, in the same way that a phoneme is an irreducible unit of sound, and a grapheme would be an irreducible unit of graphic element of some kind, then a meme would be an irreducible element of behavior. Is that right?
Yeah, of the reproducible behavior, yes.
Yes. Yeah, got it. Okay. So while we're at it, it seems to me that when we talk about ideograms, then some of them are graphic images that can be kind of verbalized, but not nearly as powerfully or as efficiently. And some are hard to verbalize at all. So in a sense, if you think about ways in which we try to convey something that we feel very deeply and powerfully, there are actually forms which don't even try to put them into words, such as music, for example, or dance, or visual arts. And it seems to me that what I'm trying to sort of put my finger on here has to do with this. So this is my favorite emoji. This is one that my daughter and I send back to each other when we're texting to each other every so often. And it's so interesting because I don't believe I could actually put into words what that is expressing in fewer than, say, 25, 30, 35 words. And yet nowadays, because we have digitized emojis, it's a single keystroke. So one of the questions that I'm considering is that the great revolution that ideograms such as emojis have done in amplifying or broadening the range of what had been thought of as writing also has this huge advantage in that they are intercultural and interlingual. They're things that can be used by people internationally. And I had this idea that I would actually try and find out the total number of people who have ever learned Esperanto and compare it to the number of people who use emojis in 1 second. Because Esperanto obviously was an attempt to create a universal language, but using traditional language methods such as, letters, words, phonemes, etc. And I'm thinking that one of the things the internet is doing is inviting or compelling us to globalize the way we think about communication, because not everyone speaks the same language. So what are we doing then to try and keep up with the rate at which the internet is globalizing communication? And obviously we have,
I want to stop you there for a moment. Keep your thought.
I just want to say one tiny more bit. So obviously we have people who are like Google who are trying to globalize, the Noto Sans range. So we have fonts for everything, etc. But it seems to me that actually the real way to attain a more rapidly globalizing communication is to think about how we can expand the range of writing beyond the one phoneme equals one grapheme method, which we're sort of stuck with. Okay, over to
Well,
you.
I agree with that. I agree with that, but there's certain things. Talking about ideograms, the best example of ideogram is this, or this, or
Uh-huh.
this.
Yep.
They're not meaning anything else but number. And then you encounter a very similar problem with emojis because, as you probably know, or if you don't, then I'll tell you something new. Emojis are interpreted different in different cultures.
Sure. The eggplant being the best example.
No, actually, the faces. Actually, the faces. Some of them have different interpretation on Chinese side of the
Sure.
internet. The eggplant is a good one, but most of the people know it. Cherries also. But the theory that linguists now are prone to talk about emojis using the theory that this is not exactly an ideogram. This is actually a gesture. So emoji is a gesture that is used in the places, if you look at the text, in the places that usually you kind of
Sure.
do a little thing with your hands. It's a gesture. What is a ideogram? It's a different thing.
Okay.
But I absolutely agree with the idea that we must evolve. I don't like that word, but yeah,
Right.
we must
Develop.
change. We must change towards a more to more unified communication, and surprisingly enough, we probably do it in an Anson way. Have you ever got interested in his? Oh, sorry, I lost my.
I'm sorry, I'm not catching the word that you're saying.
Do you know what was the Anson idea about his Altera?
No.
What is the general communication?
Oh, you mean as in Anson Ching?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, what is the most popular communication? What is the most ubiquitous communication in his, the most common communication in his world? It's gestures, but not gestures in the meaning of emojis, but gestures in the meaning of sign language. And we are probably going because sign language has a lot more of iconicity in itself than the spoken language has.
Yes. And
And probably we are
that's the
moving
reason why when we travel, you can get by knowing maybe two words, but then doing a whole lot of gesturing and universal signs.
And what about that? I think that we are going eventually to develop some kind of IKEA-based communication that is going to be mostly drawings. I don't know. I was thinking about it because IKEA is the example of the universal language that doesn't need any words.
Yeah.
And isn't it it's not even a notation like music, or maybe it is. But it actually gives you exact communication, how and what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And IKEA does it brilliantly.
Yes, and that's the thing that I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about how much money Microsoft and Apple and Google are putting into word-based universalizations of communication. And I'm thinking if a similar amount of time and money and effort were put into developing hybrid forms. So, for example, I've got a slide that I'm going to put in my book, which is just a photograph I took in the car wash. So I'm going through the car wash, and this is it's in an economically depressed town. It's not a high-end car wash by any means, but as you're about to enter the car wash, there is a panel, and with each instruction there is a picture. And what I love about this, apart from the fact that, you look at it and you can see exactly what it means, is that whoever put together this panel can't spell very well. And so there's the word break, B-R-E-A-K, but there's a picture of a foot pushing down a pedal.
Okay.
So even if you can't spell, you know what it is that you're supposed to do. And the other genius area of that is European road signs. I mean, that's something that was obviously given a whole lot of thought, probably 45 years ago, I'm thinking. Signs of universal significance and clarity.
Oh, I believe it was much earlier.
Could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Because when I took my driving test in 1973, we had to know the meaning of the road signs then. They were called continental road signs at the time. So probably, and this is a universal truth.
Yeah.
Everybody on the mainland of Europe did it before Britain did.
Well, you guys are still having problems with, I mean, in the US, you've got still the measurements and stuff. So, it will take time.
Right. So let's go back to this question of how do you imagine the definition of writing will become broader and more embracing and more elastic? And do you see it as being a form that becomes increasingly IKEA-like, where you start, or do you supplement that with words of kind of phonetic words that are also sort of fairly universal, like the word stop, for example? So stop is not a universal word, or was not a
What is the most universal word, probably?
What's that?
Okay.
Sure, exactly. But 50 years ago,
and how do you spell it in Chinese?
Show me.
Same way.
Yeah.
Got two Latin letters that made it into Chinese writing system. And my favorite story is, if you go to China, you'll see it everywhere, or at least it was a very popular way of spending time in China. You have road signs like this.
Okay.
Kala okay. And this one was used to spell okay, which is completely different word, because that's from Japanese. It is from English, orchestra, karaoke, empty orchestra. But it's really interesting because it made like something that Umberto Eco is talking about, constant semanticization, so making of meaning, phonetic, symbolic, phonetic, symbolic. Because for them, this was symbolically something foreign, made it okay, so they took the whole sign. Then they knew that it pronounces okay, so we can use it as a phonetic for this another foreign word and use it as okay.
Okay, so that leads on to another question I want to ask you. So it seems to me that one of the sort of fundamental beliefs about conveying meaning that have been central to Western culture for centuries actually involves this strange kind of dimensional transformation. So if we want to convey what we mean in words, it involves a transformation from something we hear, namely speech, to something we see. And I thought this is really kind of interesting because it sort of takes this notion of meaning and assumes that we're going to understand it better somehow if it also has a visual component. So when we speak to each other, we add, as you say, gestures, all kinds of visual components to convey what it is that we want to convey. And what I'm wondering is whether, as we talk about this movement toward the future, there's actually a change in conversion that's taking place, where increasingly whatever it is that needs to be understood needs to be visual. So I'm thinking about, for example, all of the work that's being done with heads-up displays for helicopter pilots or jet pilots, for example. So there is all of this research being done which says, how do we actually convey information in a way that is rapid and urgent and is instantly understood, but doesn't distract from the fact that the pilot has to be able to see where they're going, or they're going to crash into the ground, or you know, electricity wires or something like that. And I'm really curious to know what kinds of sort of forward thinking are taking place that don't involve a reproduction of the printing press. So this is what Jerry Leonidas talks about all the time, is that if computing simply thinks of itself as imitating what printing did, then it's missing huge layers of opportunity. It's really...
It already doesn't. So already we have something which is like a computer orality, if you will. What we call orality is a constantly changing process of instant communication. And the only difference from a real orality is that it does not disappear. It stays on your computer, it stays in your device, or whatever it is. But it's actually instant communication. So we have something that was not even remotely possible in a writing and printing time, because all that communication was way removed. Now we have instant. And it's completely different space, because, as you probably, I think you mentioned it somewhere, that we are communicating by writing way more than ever in the history of the humankind.
Right. Not only that, but as you say, if we think, for example, about this Zoom as being a form of communication that a fraction of the people were using, say, 8 years ago compared to who's using it now, right? Then one of the things is we are already working out the rules for when and how writing is valuable. So many times, as you know, when we've done our conversations, somebody in the audience has said, I'm going to put that in the chat, you know. So there is a sense that a twofold thing. First of all, it's concretized by being put in writing. And secondly, it's therefore also immediately a link so that we can then use that to go somewhere else.
But getting back to your previous thought, I would like to just mention one thing, that we are basically built for visuals. And actually, a few days ago, I talked to my friend who had a very terrible kind of a, what is it called? Multiple sclerosis. And I haven't talked to her for like 15 years. We used to perform on stage together. And I can barely understand her now. And what my other friend says, that you should come over and see her, because then it is much easier to talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting, because the component of seeing is always important, and it always has been important in communication. And we just did not realize. We kind of still think in split ideas, that you've got seeing and hearing. But no, they usually work together. But another thing I want to actually get back to the start of our conversation, when we were talking about writing, speaking, and meaning. You know what is the word for painting or drawing holy icon in Orthodox Church?
Isn't it like the word graphos?
No, the word in most of the Slavic languages is pisat, and that means to write an icon.
Yes, absolutely. And I think graphos meant the both.
You do not draw the image, you write it.
Yes.
Because all the meanings you write in it, people can understand. And they do not have to be pronounced. They do not have to be verbalized. So I think that this kind of thinking, that writing has a different definition. Because if you look from the Russian or Orthodox standpoint, writing was just conveying of meaning, not necessarily conveying of the speech.
Right.
And that narrowing, I think it took part in our civilization.
I think
So
so.
I think we're not going somewhere. We're still going on the same road. We're just changing directions all the time. Sometimes we're going toward the phonetics, and there's still people thinking of, let's simplify orthography because it's so stupid. It's so removed from the way things sound. And other people say, wait, that actually makes it easier to understand because you differentiate different meanings that already sound the same.
Going along with what you just said, also in the book, and maybe you've come to this already, is that in Vanuatu, where they do the sand works, anthropologists tend to talk about them as sand paintings or sand drawings. But this article I read by the guy who wrote the proposal for inclusion of this into the UNESCO heritage said that the word that they use themselves to describe it, is the same word that they use to describe writing by, other cultures. So from their point of view, we call it art because we don't think of writing in those terms. From their point of view, they're doing exactly what you're saying that the Russian Orthodox are doing, which is to say, this is how I'm conveying meaning to you. And it may be dynamic rather than static. It may involve performance. It may involve all these other elements, but this is what we call writing. It's that inclusive.
Yeah, so we maybe will end up eventually with having either accepting the whole idea of graphic communication systems, if they're in any way systematic and you can take this systematicity and show it to people so it's a system, or we eventually call it all writing. I believe that scientists would not agree that it is all writing, but they will finally agree upon this graphic communication system. But talking about the future development of humanity, I don't know. I think right now we have a process of what is happening in the internet, and it is ungovernable. Whatever the efforts are, whether the Russians cutting off their internet or Chinese setting up firewalls, people will be communicating. People will be communicating en masse because Chinese will always, unless they want to cut their own throats, they'll always need to communicate with the world because they want to make business. And for that, they will need to use the internet. And there will be communication all the time. So we are going to work out some kind of pidgin. I would say that would probably be a graphic pidgin.
Well, I think, doesn't the word pidgin automatically mean it's going to have multiple elements or multiple ancestry? Yes. So it may well be like
it means two things at the same time.
Yeah.
Most of the users are adult. And second, different things are mixed up together and very simplified.
Yep. And the more intercultural and interlingual communication takes place, and especially if it's driven by the demographic that is most heterodox, namely children and teenagers, they're going to be inventing stuff that is going to break whatever rules. And I think they are absolutely going to prove your point that it's ungovernable.
No, the only thing I'm worried about is the stupid war. But
yes,
right now they're trying to cut off internet and so on, and people are all over the world, and this is really worrying for me. They're trying to control the internet. I'm so much for the free speech that it pisses me off all the time.
Yeah.
All the talk about control here, control there, cancel or whatever. The Russians are having their own outrage culture. And this is worrisome. But then again, the devices and the interfaces are going to be more and more plastic in the meaning not of the made of plastic, right, but plasticity.
Yes, malleable, universal.
Malleable. Or so they will allow us to write upside down whatever we want.
Yep.
but not by just flipping camera. They'll probably be much more, allowing us to have much more interplay. Probably eventually they arrive at having every one of us little screens with side vision in graphics communicated with additional information for us.
Well, that's what Frode Hagelin was talking about, the fact that, we are the last people on Earth who are going to communicate not using a headset.
Yeah, I believe that. Eventually it's going to happen because have you ever listened to the audiobook?
Yes.
Or an audiobook, any kind.
Yeah.
So average book, it's of this thickness. How long is it?
I don't know. I'm listening to a Thomas Pynchon novel, which is this thick, and that's like 30 hours long or something.
Oh God. Okay, but let's say the average book of normal thickness, that will be 8 hours. This book you can read in 1 hour.
Yeah.
All right, 1 hour and a half. But saying with normal speed, but you have to listen 8 hours. You see the difference of the information.
Yeah.
And this is one thing. And another thing that we can also start thinking about, because I don't know how is it going to work. The recent not recent, a year ago, Elon Musk was doing the pig interface.
Oh, the chip in the head?
Yeah. Imagine if we have a possibility of putting information directly into the head at much faster pace. There are going to be people that are going to do all those cyberpunk things that you have in your brain. That's interesting, because I don't know how would they use it. But the first movies of cyberpunk, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk, right?
Yeah, yes.
It usually chose visual representation from the cyberspace.
Yeah.
And probably it's going to be something like that.
Yes, and it'll be really interesting to see whether, as we've said, as I was saying with the Zoom, whether there is, whether people kind of instinctively involve a traditionally written element as part of it. I mean, it's sort of fascinating to me that if you look at many TikToks or Instagram reels, simply presenting a video image is rarely enough. People want to also superimpose on that their own commentary in various forms, and it may be sort of paralinguistic or metalinguistic or whatever, but usually there's something in there as well which represents their stamp and their perspective, because they can,
Yeah, and another kind of language, visual language that is developing, and now it is kind of becoming more and more unified, is everything that happens within games and navigation, web pages.
Yeah.
Because all those things, they need to more and more unify, because more and more users are using all kinds of internet. So they need to have similar way of the visual setup. They need to have similar ways of navigating within pages. All the scrolls, all the arrows, and everything is actually another visual communication.
Yeah.
Visual language.
Yes.
With its own visual grammar that already developed what Neil Kahn is calling in comic books language, is develop its own grammar and its own dialects.
Yeah.
But probably there's going to be a general visual language that will be common for us all, unless we break up civilization into pieces, which is still possible.
Thanks so much.